Unless 7:01. I don't know if you want to wait a few more minutes.
Sure, let's wait a few more minutes and just maybe we can say hi to everybody. And I think we have all of our speakers now here. I was just looking. I believe we do. So, yeah, great. We'll see everybody.
Hello, Roger. I was just thinking about our group the other day and thinking and wondering if we should get it started up again. I think you're muted.
No, I don't think the group hasn't started up, and I don't know if it will.
Yeah, I would. I miss seeing everybody.
Yeah.
Well, Jeannie, I think we'll get started. And I think you're recording us, so that's good. All right, great. Well, good evening, everyone. So my name is Janelle Rice. I serve at Calvary Moravian Church on the west side of Allentown, and also have the pleasure and privilege of serving as the chair of the Lehigh Conference of Churches Board of Directors. And so it's my honor to be able to welcome you to our Week of Prayer for Christian Unity evening. It is both a time of worship and a time of engagement a little bit further into maybe what you've been following throughout the week, as we've offered some wonderful devotions. And my thanks goes to Pam Weiss, member of our ecumenical committee, for providing the spiritual guidance and thoughtful writing in all of those devotions that maybe you had a chance to read over. And if you didn't, they'll be shared, I'm sure, in other formats with you. So again, welcome to the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity that has been really brought to us by the World Council of Churches. The Week of Christian Unity has been part of an ecumenical worldwide celebration for over 100 years. And as I was reading a little bit more about the history of it today, somebody was telling me that we were studying Paul's letter to the Corinthians in our Bible study this morning. Somebody was telling me it was the feast day for St. Paul. And the Week of Christian Unity was held intentionally between the feast days for St. Peter and St. Paul. And I'm surmising that's because of the relationship between reaching out to Jews and Gentiles alike and bringing all of those together. So again, I welcome you to this special evening, and I wanted to share the theme for the week, which again, you've certainly caught on if you've been following the daily devotions that came to us from the World Council of Churches. It's from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verse 2. We have seen his star in the east, and we have come to worship him. So scripture tells us that the Magi followed a bright star until it came to rest over the place where Jesus could be found. The bright light then led them to the one who would be the light of the world, the one who, quoting Isaiah, said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." So again, like I said, we hope that you've been part of our 7 devotionals that has walked us through the very localized ways that we are the hands and feet of Christ, the very localized ways that we are declaring the Spirit of the Lord is upon all of our brothers and sisters. They have been highlighting how the ministries of the Lehigh Conference of Churches have been done in numerous different ways, in 7 different ways. And they've asked us how we, like the Magi, are called to follow the light of Christ and to worship Christ by seeking illumination and doing so for the poor, the captive, the blind, the oppressed. Again, as we heard that quote of Jesus quoting from the prophet Isaiah. So if you haven't seen these devotionals yet, we'll certainly try to make them available. I think we can put them together into one bundle. But as you know, they've highlighted very short 2-3 minute videos regarding the different ministries and the different places that the Conference of Churches is active in our community and serving our brothers and sisters. So tonight, we thought that as our ecumenical committee was planning this evening, we would take the last day of the week of prayer for Christian unity to be together on Zoom in a bit of a worship, but also a bit of a conversation service. And we thought, again, as we're trying to promote our Christian unity, to bring together 7 lay and ordained leaders, various traditions, Christian traditions, and different expressions of our faith, to share their brief reflections on the past 7 days in different focuses upon our ministries. So what I'm going to do is, as we get started, we will introduce you one by one, and they'll be able to share what we've asked them to share is a brief. And so as we're saying this to our ordained, and I'm a pastor, so I can say this, but especially as we say this to the ordained leaders, that we're asking them to share a brief reflection upon their topic. And again, we'll enjoy, hopefully, if you're able to stay, a little conversation afterwards. So that's the plan. Sound good to everybody? Okay. So let's open ourselves with a word of prayer as we come together. Oh, gracious God, let us fix our eyes on the star that was seen in the east, and allow it to lead us as well. Let us come into your presence, O God, with thanksgiving and joy, bringing all of the sick, the suffering, the marginalized, the refugees, the uprooted before you, knowing that you, Lord, can dispel darkness with your light. As we pray today for the unity of your church, may we in our communities also be the lights that guide others to Christ within each of our brothers and sisters. As we have seen the star of Jesus in our own lives, we have come to worship him as the Magi did. We have come to offer him the gift of our lives, to share love and justice with all of our brothers and sisters. Unite us now, O Lord, with one another as we come from north and from the south, from the east and the west, as we come to pay homage to you through the actions of our lives, through the work of our hands and feet, especially as we recognize tonight in this community of the Lehigh Valley and through the ministries and services of the Lehigh Conference of Churches. May all that we do and say and work for your greater kingdom glorify you, the light of the world, and our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. So I'm going to just very briefly introduce each of our speakers. You could say a little bit more about yourselves if you would like, and then again, I'll introduce our topic, and we'll go through one by one as we walk through these days, these past 7 days, and reflections. So I'm excited that our first guest and speaker will be the Reverend Dr. Steve Simmons. He'll be speaking to us on the topic of poverty, and he is serving as a parish associate at the First Presbyterian Church in Bethlehem. So, Steve, welcome.
Okay, thanks. Interesting format. Hi, everybody. It's this kind of semi-formal, semi-informal, Zoomy sort of thing. But anyway, here we go. When Pam asked me to take this assignment, I took it with a little fear and trembling, and that only increased when my wife said to me, kindly but pointedly, "What do you know about poverty?" Now, I have worked in soup kitchens, I've run a food pantry, I've pastored a church in a distressed neighborhood, I've helped to build a Habitat House in Chicago, I've done all the right sort of middle-class poverty ministries, and I believe and hope they did some good, but still it's true. What do I know about poverty? I have never personally lived on the edge or known the fear of coming up short at the end of the month and not knowing what's next. In many ways, while I do know about poverty, I don't know poverty from the inside. We live in a country where there are lots of opinions about poverty and where the data about poverty are hotly debated, but that often doesn't know poverty and really doesn't want to know. As a society, we work very hard to conceal it. We tear down tent cities, we move those people down the street, or we give them a bus ticket to anywhere else. We quantify and analyze and write off the poor as though they were nothing more than an inconvenient spreadsheet. But I've been lucky because I've had a number of teachers who have helped me to scrap some of my ideas about the poor. One was a 10-year-old kid who was a participant in the summer program for mostly Mexican and Puerto Rican children in downtown Reading. Now, as part of the program, we took up a daily offering, and we always made sure that the counselors would have a pocket full of spare change that they could give to a kid who had either forgotten or didn't have any extra to spare. And at the end of the week, we had raised $40, which was a weighty sum. And I asked the kids what they'd like to do with the money. And this particular kid's hand shot up without a moment's hesitation, and he said, "I know, let's help the poor people." Well, I guess nobody had told him that by any reasonable standard, he was one of the poor people. All he knew was that there were other people who needed help, and that we needed to help them. And we did. That was more than 20 years ago, and that moment still shines a light on me. Now, it's not always a comforting light, because it illuminates my path and it also reveals the places where I don't care enough. He shows me my own spiritual poverty. Let's help the poor people. This kid was a child of the light in a way that I, in my best moments, aspire to be. His light may have been a modest one. He didn't think so, and he was going to let it shine. And he helped me to realize how poor I was and am in so many ways that seriously count. He was never really my client or my charge. He was and continues to be my mentor. He helps me to see things and people in a new light. Maybe that's the key. In what light do we see each other? In what light do we see all of God's children? The wise men had come to see things in and by a new light, and they brought their gifts to Jesus, the child of the poor, and so must we. Whatever our form of poverty may be, whatever our gifts may be. We've recently celebrated the birth of another kid in another Bethlehem who was born poor and born a child of the light and who still is the light of the world. Let's follow him. And we can only do that if we throw in our lot with that of the poor people, whether that poverty comes in the form of material need or spiritual emptiness or a failure to care enough. And then and only then, as Jesus taught us, will we love our neighbors, all of our neighbors, as ourselves. And then our light will shine too. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you, Steve. It was a beautiful reflection. And we're going to, again, hopefully have a little time for discussion and questions, either around the videos or the reflections or what our speakers are saying at the end. So we'll move into our next speaker. The topic is mental health, and I'm very pleased to welcome Nani Cuadrado. She serves as the in Valley Health Partners Street Medicine. And Nani, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Janelle. I think one of the, much like Steve said, you think about, what do I know about poverty? What do I know about mental health? What I can share is, as a physician assistant, I'm a provider of medical care. But one of the things I think I wanted to share when I thought about why I was actually being invited to talk about this is that when medicine fails, or when community support fails, or community involvement fails, what we've found as a team providing healthcare to persons who are experiencing homelessness is that when it all comes down to it, it's really about community and connection. And when we don't have medicine, or we can't get folks to appointments or because of severe mental illness, they don't want to take their medicines. What we do have, and I think this is something that's empowering for all of us, is that we have community. And community provides our patients and provides us with a sense of belonging, with purpose, and with support. And so while it's nice that I am a provider that can prescribe medications, and I'm associated with an organization called Street Medicine, what I want to remind all of us is that it's really actually about connection. We all crave it. And what mental health does is it creates this source of isolation and loneliness that medicine sometimes can't cure. And what can, though, is kind of within our grasp as a community, and that is creating community and creating connection with folks. And so while as a medical provider, I've been asked to speak about mental health, what I want to remind all of us is that really mental health diagnoses, really the common core as far as symptom goes, is loneliness and isolation. And that sometimes cannot be cured with medicine, but really can be cured with the belonging, support, and purpose that community can offer. And so hopefully this is an empowering thought, because as a community, what has failed a lot of our folks is the thing that also can be the cure. So hopefully that is a word of encouragement, because it's really not just about the prescribing ability that I have, but really it's about what we have as a community to offer to folks who are suffering from mental illness. And that's all I think I have.
Great. Thank you so much. It's good to have you with us. Thank you for sharing. Well, as we get into our third day of reflection, it was on addressing hunger. And I'm very happy to introduce the Right Reverend Hopeton Glennon, who serves as senior pastor at Central Moravian Church in Bethlehem. Hopeton, good to have you.
Thank you, Janelle. It's great being here, and warmest greetings to everyone. Looking forward to a time of reflection together. I serve a congregation located in the heart of downtown Bethlehem that provides a food pantry for the community. Pre-pandemic, we were open to the public on the third Saturday of the month. Since summer of 2020, we are now open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, but always that third week of the month. This past weekend was the fourth Saturday of the month. Nevertheless, I received a phone call at 9:45 on Saturday morning. There was a line formed at the door of the food pantry and patrons waiting to be served. Hunger is easily defined as a feeling of discomfort or weakness caused by the lack of food, coupled with the desire to eat. Health and fitness guru Jack LaLanne has been credited with coining the phrase, eat to live, don't live to eat. By that, he means we should eat with function and purpose in mind, not with enthusiasm and anticipation of flavors and textures that we enjoy. Some eat to live, some live to eat, all need to eat, and yet some simply do not have the resources or the locations to be able to eat. We all know it. The United States has more than enough food for everyone in this country. And yet, 1 in 10 Americans go hungry. 4 in 10 students go hungry. Speaking as a Christian, it is my duty to alleviate hunger and its root causes which of course include poverty. 15 years ago, I served a Moravian congregation in Southern California. My friend was rector of the Episcopal Church and in the same community. And she was the one who drove it home forcefully. If she said it to me once, she said it 1,000 times. The church must feed body and soul. For her, the fellowship hall was as important as the sanctuary. For her, the potluck was as vital as the sacrament. But that's just catering to the folk who are on the inside, the folk who tend to have options, the folk who tend to have the resources. Our greater challenge is to cater to those who are on the outside, without the options, without the resources, and for each of us to determine who for us is the least of these when we set about the very serious task of feeding the hungry. Sadly for us here in Bethlehem, we have got to come to grips with the reality of food deserts, the scarcity of places to purchase good, healthy, nutritious, economical food for those who have limited resources. And I really encourage us, I challenge us to set about that work for the good of the wider community. Thank you.
Thank you, Hoopton. Thank you. So next we are going to hear from, and I just want to tell you all, this is amazing. The 3 to 4 minutes is well done for you all. So good job so far. Housing instability. Daniela Sanchez serves as the housing director for Ripple Community. Daniela, thank you for being with us, and free to share with.
Sure, thanks, Danelle. So yeah, my name is Daniela Sanchez. I've been working also as a co-pastor at Ripple Church for the past 7 years or so, and then in my role as a housing director for Ripple Community for the past 4. So I'm grateful to be part of this call. My co-pastor Charlene invited me to join and be a part of this, and so it's great to meet all of you, and yeah, to join in this conversation and to participate in the devotions. So as I think about the topic of housing instability, I appreciated the Conference of Churches video that they created, and I watched that, and the two things for me that stood out were the woman who spoke about, or even the statistic in the beginning of the video, that wages right now for people who are working minimum wage jobs, or even those who are trying to get higher paying jobs, the imbalance of the cost of living compared to what people are receiving for income continues to widen that gap. And for so many of the people that we have known in the community that come through Ripple Church or Ripple Community Inc., their experiences of difficulties of finding, even those who have disability income or Social Security income, just finding something that is affordable. The fact that now in town, perhaps maybe it's the same in Easton or Bethlehem, here throughout the Lehigh Valley, the lack of affordable housing that people really need. And so some of the instability, different causes for that. Sometimes it's people's income. Sometimes it's connected to people's mental health. Sometimes it's connected to just kind of their physical health, sicknesses, broken family systems. Different things kind of contribute to that instability where people go through these cycles. Maybe it's a transitional program, maybe it's an apartment, and they lose their housing and they find themselves experiencing homelessness. So how do we as churches, how do we as organizations kind of work at that? With Ripple Community Inc., you know, our housing program where we focus on permanent supportive housing, we have found that to be a good model that for people that have experienced so much instability, need that community, as Nani was talking about, need that community to surround them and to bring those different pieces together. But what's really important is having that home base, right? You know, just a couple of weeks ago, we had someone come by through our community center who had been staying at the Y, or there was even another one, she had her own apartment and she just had like a terrible night of sleep. And so that whole day, right, she was just grumpy. Yeah, I mean, what we realize is how important it is to have a safe space for you to rest your head at night, for you to feel secure, right? You're not worrying about different, you know, someone's going to break into your room or sharing a bathroom for those who have, you know, a shared, you know, room for rent kind of things. How do we, as churches and as organizations, nonprofit organizations, whatever it may be, how do we work together so people have a sense of home and people have a sense of community? So I guess that's what I would encourage us to be working on, to be thinking about. All these issues are very important. We're working at them in different ways. But when people have a safe place to rest their head, some of these other little pieces, right, other aspects of life are able to, yeah, for them to kind of work on, for some of these things to play out and be beneficial for themselves and for others. And something that we have learned through at Ripple Church is just the power of working with people. We don't always have the answer right. Some people come to the community center and say, I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. I was just kicked out from my place, or I can't go to the Y, or I don't want to go to this warming shelter station, whatever it may be, whatever location. And we don't have always the easy answers, but we can be that community, faith community, or just relationships with people where we can walk the long and difficult journey that people are facing and experiencing. So let's do this work together. We need each other. We need the churches. We need organizations working together. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, we're kind of moving into another area, of course, that is connected to housing instability and, of course, the effects of that being homelessness. And we're pleased to be joined by someone that we work with quite closely and on staff at the Lehigh Conference of Churches. Pastor Jeannie Watson serves at the Conference of Churches as the Ecumenical Associate. She is also a pastor in Allentown. So Jeannie, I'll let you begin with our topic of homelessness, and if you want to say more about yourself as well.
Thank you, Janelle. Good evening, everyone. I'm the Ecumenical Associate at the Conference of Churches and the Senior Pastor of One Church Allentown, located right downtown in Allentown. And my topic is homelessness. And when Steve started his reflection, he said, what do I know about poverty? I can say I have experienced homelessness. And my experience in homelessness as a young girl was the community was not there for me. The community turned their nose up, turned their back up, you know, and it was a place where I felt lonely, but still had to make a decision that I still had to go to school, but in school, not knowing when school was over, where I was going, not knowing where I was going to sleep. And my reflection is, if we as the community, as churches, as the agencies can show empathy to those who are in these situations, regardless of how they find themselves there, regardless if it was their fault or not, regardless of the circumstance. At that time, I didn't need someone to say to me, well, if you didn't do that, then that wouldn't have happened. I didn't need to hear that. And I was young. I was pregnant, and that was not something that was comforting. So these people that I went to for help showed no empathy, showed no help, and had no regard for my situation. And then I didn't feel like I was a person. So I reflect on how we should continue to show empathy and recognize that we are all humans. We are all God's creations, and we all go through situations regardless of what it may be. So I would say to us, you know, as community leaders, as all the agencies, we should not get desensitized because we see so much of it. That when people come to us, it's just like they're a number, or you have no compassion, or have no empathy. I come from the Christian faith. Jesus did not show anything like that towards anyone that was in need. He got up and met the need. He loved them where they were at and provided. And we know that we're talking about the light. He is the light of the world. And we should allow that light to shine so that someone else can see the light at the end of the tunnel. That this is a situation of homelessness you may be in, but there's a way to get out. And unfortunately, people stay in the state of homelessness because if one thing don't work, and like Daniela said, everything's connected. So if there's one link that does not fit, it's hard to get out. If you're homeless and you're working, but there's no affordable housing, it's hard to get up out of that situation because you don't have the money. Working and homeless, there's a lot of people who are homeless and working, but because of the unstable housing, the lack of affordable housing, people stay in those situations. And we cannot prejudge, but be the light and show the light and have compassion, have empathy, and try to understand and not become desensitized. When I first started working at the Lehigh Conference of Churches, I was the receptionist. So I was the first person that every client that we serve saw. And they came in with all types of situations, all kinds of emotions. And then when I will find myself becoming, and Abby could be a witness to this because we started at the same time, I would say, listen, y'all, I need a break because I'm not feeling like I'm being someone who is having compassion, because it's so much. You can get overwhelmed, and it's like, okay, you're just having a situation, not showing compassion, not empathy. So I would take a break from the front desk because I would never want to have gotten desensitized to anyone's situation. So I would say, let's keep our sensitivity. Let's allow the light to shine. And I want to quote, which has become one of my favorite quotes from Amanda Gorman. For there is always light. If only we were brave enough to see it. If only we are brave enough to be it. Let's be that light. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for cycling us back to light again, as well as our theme of following that light and that modern connection. Well, thank you, Jeannie. We are now going to hear about the topic of housing after incarceration. Shelia Cleaver, is it Cleaver or Clever? Clever, sorry. Okay. Who is serving on the Lehigh Conference of Churches Justice and Advocacy Committee. You also are a member of First Pres Allentown. Am I right on that?
I am.
Okay, great. I didn't have that down, but I remember that tucked away in my brain somewhere. So if you want to say more about yourself, and thanks so much for being with us to talk about housing after incarceration.
I think that you said enough about me, so that's good. And I want to follow up on what Steve said at the beginning. As I'm talking about prison, and I'm like, okay, so what do I know about prison? This is a good question. And I kept asking that question at the Justice and Advocacy Committee. And until Bob Weldon found a bunch of Mennonites that went to prison with me for a week. And so I learned a lot about different kinds of prisons. And so basically, I just want to go back to where we were back in 2013 at the Justice and Advocacy Committee. We looked at violence, and we decided that prison actually is a form of violence. A form of violence against the poor, those that are not white, the mentally challenged, migrants fleeing violence. And all of this prevents us from caring for all of humanity. In 2013, we brainstormed the question, what causes violence? And we looked at what the Conference of Churches does. Seeks to end homelessness, make housing affordable for everyone, ending hunger, ending poverty, and determined that violence is involved in all of these things. And when we asked, what are some of the aspects of violence in these things, we answered by discovering that housing vouchers are not available to those who have been in prison. Food stamps are not available to those who have been in prison. Jobs are not available to those who have been in prison. And as a result, many of those who have been in prison are homeless. As a society, we have created structures that continue to punish those who come out of prison after they have already served their time. But what about going to prison in the first place? Many people know that a good lawyer can keep someone out of prison, a lawyer that costs money. The poor go to prison because they are poor. Many know that law enforcement officers target Black and brown faces. Non-white people go to prison because they are not white. When I visited the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections in Harrisburg, Uli Clem, the director of religion for the PA prison system, taught me that about 40% of those in prison have a mental, learning, or physical disability. About 30% are sex offenders. 65% of PA prisoners are there because they have a drug addiction, and 40% are there solely on drug charges alone. And if you are a sex offender, if you have done something violent, if you have trafficked in drugs, you're not eligible for Section 8 housing. When I had a chance to listen to the Mennonite Central Committee's Director of Immigration Education, Salo Paulo, I learned about the history of detaining asylum seekers in the US and the laws constructed to prevent those fleeing violence in other countries from finding a safer place to raise their children. And for a while, the Justice and Advocacy members were visiting PA legislatures to see if they could be convinced to reduce those going to prison, change lifestyle demands while in prison, and make transitioning to life outside of prison easier, so the recidivism rate could go down. And these are some of the topics that we addressed. First, change the laws that send nonviolent people to prison in the first place. 2, stop charging juveniles as adults. 3, fund treatment centers for drug abuse instead of sending people to prison. 4, end mandatory minimums. 5, stop locking up asylum seekers. 6, ban the box. 7, allow the formerly incarcerated to have access to public housing, food stamps, and general welfare. 8, transition people while they are still in prison to life outside of prison. And 9, stop charging exorbitant fees for telephone calls. And like this, number 10, stop charging exorbitant fees for underwear, socks, healthcare, and self-care items. So these are some of the things that we talked about at the Justice and Advocacy Committee. And thank you for your time.
Wow. Wow, thank you. I feel like I'm going to ask you to repeat a couple of those numbers. And that was a lot of information and very good. Thank you, Julia. So we'll move to our last day that we covered in this 7-day stretch of devotionals, which was on racial injustice. And the Reverend Dr. Joanne Machado is going to share with us. She serves as the senior pastor at the barn. So Pastor Joe.
Thank you. First, I want to say a thank you to Pastor Jeannie Watson for her powerful message that she gave, that was in the video she gave on the steps of the Capitol in Harrisburg. And just thank you for your message and your prophetic witness and your love. And it was a privilege to stand with you on those steps. Racial injustice and inequity is systemic, and it is embedded in everything that we have discussed already this evening. And for many people who live in white skin identity like myself, who describe ourselves as progressive, liberal, open-minded Christians, who like to think that we're good people and doing good things, we like to think that racism doesn't exist. We like to ignore that racism is the air that we breathe. It's all around us, and we can't ignore it. James Baldwin calls this the lie. Eddie Gow defined the lie as really a set of lies. He identifies as a value gap, which is built on the assumption that white lives are more valuable than Black lives. This lie is the water we drink and the air we breathe, and we cannot escape the lie. It is so completely embedded within us because for those of us in white skin, we are born and raised and conditioned to believe the lie. And for those of us who believe and commit ourselves to following Jesus, we must confront and resist the lie. And we see this lie at work when we talk about public education for our children. Our public school system is built on a system of apartheid. It is separate and it is unequal. In this country, public schools began because of a vision of faithful people who were guided by their moral principles, and they started a system of education where they believed that children should have the ability to read, that it was empowering. And yet, since the beginning of our nation, there has been inequity in our schools based on race. In Pennsylvania, on average, the whitest districts get thousands of dollars more than their fair share for white students, while the least white districts get thousands less for each student than their fair share, according to the fair funding formula. Public schools are built on the lie that white children are more valuable than Black children. One way to resist and confront this lie and to confront the racism and racial inequality in our communities is to begin with equity in education for our children. We have created this system where there is inequity, and we've created a system where for our Black and brown children, they go from public school to prisons. It's the school to prison pipeline. The majority of students go to prison over going to college. And I stand before you today to say this must change. We must be willing to reckon with ourselves and to face the lie. This is our moral imperative to create a structure for education which values and empowers every child. Every child. It is a vision and a path toward freedom, which is a path toward justice that can liberate all of us from these racist structures. Racial inequality is a sin, and it is a sin that seeps into all of our souls. It keeps us from relationship with God and one another. Every person is a child of God. Every person is a child of God. And this is the beautiful vision that God sets before us. And I believe that God is giving us the strength to pick up our cross, to face the lie, to seek repentance and reconciliation, and to follow Jesus.
Amen. Thank you. Like ending with a sermon and a call to action at the same time. Thank you so much. Again, I feel like I could have just stopped each of you and just said, let's have a conversation and ask some questions. So, we'll try our best to just kind of open it up now, I think was our vision, and just to have conversations with any of our speakers about any of the topics, or if there was something that you watched in the video or reflected upon within these 7 days that you wanted to bring up as well. I think the floor is open for that. Again, I think our plan, Pam, if I'm not mistaken, was to go till about 8:30 or so, if possible. But if you need to drop off because of life stuff, that's fine too. But we kind of wanted to hold our time to about an hour of programming and then have some conversations afterwards, if that's okay. So we won't offend anyone if anyone needs to run, but we'll open it up for conversation. So anyone want to share?
I wanted to look back on the reflection of the homelessness and the question that was put together: what supplies might we provide for the shelters? And I just wanted to say, like, when we want to be a help to the shelters and the agencies that's providing, I believe that it's a good thing to ask what's needed, because we always assume, and they may have, like, okay, we know we're going to give, they have soap. So if you got 5,000 buckets of soap, they don't need soap right now. If we ask what's needed, they may say toothpaste or washcloths or socks. So I think that's a good way when we're trying to be a help to the shelters and the agencies that's helping the homeless, to ask what's needed. Because I can see, working at the conference in the beginning, that was part of my my job, was to make the toiletry packets. And sometimes we have loads and loads of one thing and nothing. We wouldn't have no shaving cream. We wouldn't have diapers. But we're thinking we're doing a good thing by bringing that, but it's a good idea to ask what the need is. And I think that's a good help to those who are helping those in need.
A great reminder, Jeannie. I was going to say too, if there's anybody that wants to use the chat function as well to share questions, feel free to do that. Before I forget, sorry I didn't see you because I was in full screen mode, but I wanted to introduce and welcome Abby Goldferb, who's our executive director at the conference, and say thanks for being here. And certainly she doesn't need to do anything as far as speaking, but if you have a question for Abby as well, I'm sure she'd be happy to share. So what else was anyone questions or comments?
I'd like to ask a question. Well, I'm retired. I live at Luther Crest. It makes me part of the Parkland School District. I used to live in Emmaus, so I was part of the East Penn School District. So this is for Joanne. I surely know the disparities between those two districts and the Allentown School District. And I have one question I'm asking out of ignorance. As I read in the paper about school funding, it concerns me sometimes how much money is taken from say the Allentown School District or Bethlehem Area School District to help fund charter schools. Are charter schools useful for people of color to help them get a better education? Or is it a way for middle class, upper middle class to escape the public schools? Or is it a combination? I guess I'm asking, what kind of feeling should I have about charter schools? Are they good things, bad things, or is, some or in between somehow?
So, and this is, I'm by no means an expert on this. I have opinions and I won't shy away from them, but charter schools make things complicated. I think they take money away from the public school, and it's complicated the way that those dollars work. And it's complicated the way that they work with things like cyber charter schools, what it does in terms of busing. It's complicated. There are layers to this. And like I said, I'm not great with statistics. I'm a pastor and I love numbers, but I'm not very good at quoting statistics. But there's a lot of information out there that we can supply to you. I know Jeannie's worked with some of these numbers too, in terms of how school districts are organized and run, but I don't have that, like all that information off the top of my head and how the formulas work. But when you start unpacking all of the data about public school funding and how dollars get directed out or directed in, you begin to see the inequality, especially when it comes to white districts versus districts where the majority are minority students. So, but I can give you my email if you would like some of that information.
Okay, I'm just more curious than, I don't have kids.
Hello.
Sure.
Hello. Hi, this is Pastor Charlene. I'm driving, but I did want to just speak to that issue before I jump off, just as somebody, a parent who has had children in both public schools and charter schools.
Okay.
And I'm going to speak to specifically the Allentown School District. The Allentown School District is very overwhelmed. The number of students in one classroom is so packed till it overwhelms the teacher, and it makes it hard for the children to get a good education. So what I have personally experienced by taking my children out of the public school system and
You're breaking up, Charlene. We can't hear you. No.
Oh.
okay.
So I would like to add a little bit about the numbers. So the distribution of the funding is like $1,000 difference for each child, right? And then there's a rainy day fund of $1 million. that is sitting there doing nothing when the Allentown School District is impoverished, and they refuse to give that money to the districts who need it, but they're calling it the rainy day fund. Millions of dollars when they see the need. So just a little bit of the numbers about that. But yeah.
If I can add, it's no accident that there's such wide disparity in the funding, but for different school districts. The legislature about 50 years ago, when they did school district consolidation, intentionally created suburban districts, mostly white suburbs, and urban districts that were, Black and minority and poor folks, and set up a funding structure that was different. But my understanding is that the conversation on the floor of the legislature was very openly racist. And so we're dealing with that system that's been in place for a long time.
And it's in court right now.
Yeah.
The school district is suing Tom Wolf and others about the funding.
I'm going to have to leave. Thank you for all this. It's been moving. Thank you and helpful.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us.
This is Marie Molly. I just have a comment about I volunteered for many years. I'm a member of the ecumenical committee, by the way, is why I'm here. I volunteered for many years in the Allentown School District before school breakfast program. And it was in the elementary school for several years, and then also in one of the middle schools. And I won't name names, but I can tell you that I saw janitors, folks who are working there, going through the cafeteria every day and cleaning the floor. And that place always was wonderfully clean. And I suspect that's because there are some health regulations that they had to adhere to. But in one of the schools that I went to, and so we're talking about primarily, Black and brown students, the stairwells and the walls were filthy with handprints of kids going up the stairs, because heaven forbid they should hang on to the railing, because they're kids, and no money there to just do that. So even the environment in which they're going to school is demotivating, I thought. It broke my heart to see that. So there's so many little different ways. And it's one thing to say, well, we can't release millions of dollars, but couldn't you release a couple thousand so that these places could actually be clean, if not welcoming? So throw that into the mix.
Thanks.
Janelle, if you don't mind, I see that Bob has a question.
Yeah.
In the chat. And he was asking what are for those here who are connected with a specific congregation, what is your church doing to address racism or the root cause of any of the other issues addressed tonight? If anybody want to answer.
Yeah. Sure, I'll start. Actually, at the barn, a lot of us, a lot of us got involved with the Freedom Schools this summer to try to make up for the COVID and pandemic and get multicultural issues and build up leadership skills for kids that aren't getting the education, as you heard, in Allentown School District. So I think that's one step we can all get involved with as a community. And I know the board of the Freedom Schools is trying to expand out of Allentown through the Lehigh Valley, which would be wonderful. But those are those educational things. And then, of course, we all have working at some of the shelters and trying to keep up with the homeless list, but it does seem overwhelming, as you said, Jeannie. And
I just heard the shelter in Bethlehem had to turn people away because it's so full right now. So it's discouraging sometimes too.
Just one thing to throw into the conversation. Abby and I have talked about this somewhat along the lines of affordable housing. And this is kind of a long game effort, but there's a team of people in Atlanta who have come up with something called the game of rent. And there are about 20 versions of this, including one specifically designed for the Lehigh Valley. And it's basically a map. It's almost like a Monopoly board, but it's a map of the Lehigh Valley, and it shows what housing for an apartment will cost in various parts of the valley for various rooms and so on. And it's one of the things that's enlightening about the game is that you have life cards and other kinds of cards that you draw. And it becomes very apparent very quickly that if you have an eviction or a criminal record, or you have too many kids, or you have a disability, or it just snowballs. And, there's this tremendous pileup effect on people. And we had the Rotary, Morningstar Rotary in Bethlehem had an event. About 43 people showed up, and it was really good because it was housing advocates, it was realtors who often don't get heard from. They're always cast as the bad guys in the game, and it's not always the case. And it was really a productive, I hope, conversation. It was obviously just kind of the first step, but I think just to make people aware of this, Abby and I have talked about trying to put together some events around the game of rent, and then there was something called COVID that showed up, and it really is an in-person game. You have as many as 8 people around a board, and it gets very lively, and great discussions come out of it. So keep that in mind. We hope when the pandemic subsides at some point that we can actually get some on-site games going, and this could happen in local congregations. It could happen with groups of us, community organizations, and all that. So stay tuned.
Thank you. I think, well, I'm kind of jumping a little bit off of, but we were talking about the experience of just getting to understand more of our community, Steve, in the game of rent. I've heard of that before, and I'd be really eager to experience it. But I think that was what really all these videos did for me, was be able to really connect me with individuals who are experiencing, if it's mental health issues, housing instability, and so forth. And I just wanted to bring that up as a theme that I saw coming out of actually almost every speaker was talking about sort of this sense of dignity and respect for the individual, or the lack thereof, which is what Jeannie talks about with your experience, the lack of respect for you as a human, but what that kind of respect can give to someone in connections to community. I just found that really interesting that almost all the speakers tonight, all brought up, which, wonderful, but more than just the issue of, we need more affordable housing, but was the issue of, these are brothers and sisters, human beings just like us, even if we sit here without experiencing any of these topics personally, and we need to draw really a baseline of respect for the human first as our groundwork. Sorry, now I'm just talking too long, but I just wanted to say that was really astounding. And I just drew back to the woman. She's featured in a couple of videos if you saw them. Obviously she's not named, but she talks about being homeless, and how when she was homeless, she couldn't think beyond just finding where to, she couldn't think about all those other layers, because all she could think about was finding a home or someplace to sleep that night. And I was just kind of curious on that individual. I guess that would be Jeannie. You were talking about homelessness, but anybody else wanted to comment on that experience of that baseline need?
Go ahead, Pam.
Excuse me. I was listening, and it was taking me back. If I can share an experience, I was so fortunate that during my seminary days, I 3 times visited the Middle East. And all 3 times I was unbelievably struck by the beggars and how these are people who in their begging are literally folded into themselves, and all you see is a hand. They are literally faceless and not seen. And the culture says, don't be seen. Yes, you may beg, but don't be seen. And when I came back to the United States, I thought, well, our folks on the street maybe aren't curled up and all you see is a hand, but it's the same thing. The message that we give within our society is don't be seen. And so this series has been really meaningful for me in the idea of following the light and let it be seen, and over and over and over emphasizing what you just said, Janelle, that these are people to be seen, and our society so quickly doesn't see them. And so for me, my hope, my prayer, if nothing else comes out of the work that's happening in the conference and at Ripple and all of the organizations throughout Allentown and the Lehigh Valley, if we can get that message out of please see, let that light show that these are human beings, these are people, that those are just first steps in hopefully turning some of this around. Because for me, it was just so tragic, the idea of that there were no faces, just hands. And I thought that spoke volumes. So I just share that as that, and then all of this has been very moving for me.
Just to kind of put a gloss on that, there's a show, I think it's on Hulu, it's called Paper and Glue. And I don't know if anyone has seen it, but it's about an artist who's very much a Banksy type. I don't remember his name. It's one of those one name names, who has kind of made a career out of taking the sides of abandoned buildings and other places and putting the faces of people, Pam, to your point, huge faces, huge murals of people who otherwise would simply not be acknowledged or recognized. And it's made a huge difference. And he's been in Paris and all over the world. It's made a big difference in not only the lives of the people who are portrayed, but also just bringing them to visibility. It's a really inspiring piece. So,
what's it called, Steve? I'd love to watch.
It's called Paper and Glue.
Okay.
And it didn't make a huge splash, but it's nice that it's available on Hulu again, I think.
I know a few folks had to drop off, which was fine. We were kind of not sure how much conversation. Any other questions or thoughts? Ponderings? I was just struck, Sheila, I think Sheila is still on, of the numbers that you were stating regarding incarceration. And if I'm not mistaken, you were saying about 40% of prisoners are incarcerated are in for drugs and 65% are suffering from a drug addiction. Does that sound about right? What you?
Let me just look at my paper here.
Okay. I mean, I think that
65% of PA prisoners are there because they have a drug addiction, and 40% are in prison solely on drug charges alone.
Okay. Yeah. I knew there were certainly that number would be there. I wasn't maybe expecting it quite as high. And I don't know if that's just
neither were we. And one of the things that Uli Clem suggested was not incarcerating, especially non-violent drug offenders, which is something that Larry Krasner has decided to do down in Philadelphia. And there are several other progressive DAs around the country that have also decided not to do that. So, you know, there's a little bit more hope of reducing the prison population than there was in 2015 when I first went on this prison tour. But building prisons was something that we were told is not really a good idea because, you know, they're just really expensive to keep. So yeah, and another thing that really surprised us is that about 5% of the prison population is violent. And we were kind of agreed that we like them there. But about 30% are sexual offenders, which was a huge number to me. And, you know, I've worked with a lady that is at our church that used to work with sex offenders that were in prison. And she's convinced, because she's done this for a very long time, it's really difficult to rehabilitate sex offenders. But there was a church that we visited down in Reading where they have a small group of sex offenders that sit together every Sunday. They make sure that nobody else sits near them. There's no children nearby. And they come to church. They're welcome at church, and everybody knows who they are. And to my knowledge, this church in Reading is the only church that welcomes sex offenders. So that it really, I mean, it's hard to think about being welcoming to these people. It really is. But there is a church that has managed to do that.
Interesting. Thank you.
I haven't had as much experience in prison or jail as Sheila has, but I can say that right now, especially during COVID, prison conditions and local jails especially have been very very traumatizing to a lot of people. Imagine being locked up in your bathroom 23, 24 hours a day on some days. You know, because of COVID, people need to be isolated. Staff are bringing COVID into the jails and prisons. It's a equivalent of being in solitary confinement, although sometimes you may be stuck with a roommate who may or may not share any interests in common with you. It's really hard for me to imagine the situation. You know, visitors have been restricted from going into prison because of COVID. Rehabilitation programs have been shut down. And a lot of people are coming down with COVID as well. So it's incredible amount of damage. I also want to give you a hopeful sign, though. There are a handful of folks who met this week to talk about starting some conversations with our magisterial district justices. Those are the folks who the judges that usually see people when they're brought in by police and make decisions about cash bail or whether you're released on recognizance. but at least to have some conversations. Can we stop putting so many people in jail to traumatize folks who are there for nonviolent crimes? There are some folks who live and work near a dollar store that have had some conversations with the proprietors, and a couple of times when somebody's been caught shoplifting, a man who stole a dollhouse so he'd have something to put under the Christmas tree for Christmas. Those folks go in and said, let us handle it. Please don't call the police. We have some things in our place. He can pick, folks who need basic toiletries or something to put under the Christmas tree, et cetera, et cetera. Send them to us and we'll help you. So there are those kinds of things going on. We need a lot more folks who are doing those kinds of things, but there are some folks around town who are starting to hear the message. Unfortunately, I don't hear that so much from our church congregations.
Well, thank you. Lots of challenges and lots of signs of hope of, I think, that we're talking, like I said, a lot of the same language around dignity and respect and community connections. And I especially heard that. It was nice to hear. I know he had to go off to Denelio, but sharing that around building relationships among different partners among nonprofits or churches. So I don't think there's any other comments. I don't want to cut anybody off, but I think it is getting late. We were going to end with Pam was going to, I think, share some ending thoughts and close us, unless somebody else has. No? Okay.
I want to add my thank you. It's so wonderful and helpful. I loved hearing comments through the course of the week from different people. I hope that these devotions and these videos have been meaningful for folks. As Janelle mentioned, as we got started, that they're still available. And one of the things that we talked about within the committee was, gee, wouldn't it be great if once we have the series together, that maybe some either churches or groups or organizations, whatever, would nab them and use them perhaps for a Lent series. If you have a small group and you're looking for something to do, this would be a possibility. They are available. And as people have shared tonight, not just the presenters, but in general, that to hear those voices, to hear the people who are actually affected by these different issues going on in our community really makes a difference. And again, for me, it was meaningful because it became, yay, there's a face. This isn't just somebody that we hear about and yeah, I'll throw a few bucks in the red bucket at Christmas time. This is much more. Joanne, Joe, you were talking about how systemic all of this is, and I think others mentioned that. And so my thought for us is it is systemic. It is in there. And a lot of people may say, oh yeah, I know it's there, but are still not willing to look at it and to see it for what it is. And so for folks who know me, who I've done studies with or whatever, I share this a lot, that my absolutely favorite sound in the whole world is, oh, that moment of epiphany, which fits right in with our theme of following the star. But that moment when people get it, when they recognize, when they can see, oh, oh, now I understand. So my prayer is that this message that we've talked about tonight, that we continue to share within our different organizations, will continue to be that star that we follow. And that over and over and over again, we might, maybe not literally, but at least figuratively, start hearing our communities and the folks within our communities going, oh, now I get it. Because then we will see the work happening. We will know that the Spirit is moving among us. We know that we are following that correct star. And so that becomes my prayer. And so my prayer for us as I close us is, may we continue to follow that star, but also be that light. Because indeed, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. And in that, we have hope. In that, we have the ability to hope for those moments of awe. And in those moments of awe, we give thanks, because indeed our God is being glorified in that moment. And so as we go from here, go in peace, serve the Lord, follow that star. And remember, the light does shine in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. Amen.
Thank you all.